We are good to go.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first town hall of the fall semester. This town hall is intended to share information with you about what the spring semester ahead will look like based on what we know now, and to answer any questions that you may have about spring or about the current semester or anything else as best we can. Uh, the university is in a remarkably good place right now. Last week, I met with Dr. Burke, the head of the White House team on COVID response, and she noted that UConn was the highest in-person instruction and residential rate and lowest positivity rate of any school she'd visited, and was quite impressed with what we'd done. I want to thank the faculty, staff, and the students for the team effort that has led us to this really remarkable success for the semester. Of course, our continued success requires relentless preparation, which we're engaged with now for the spring, coupled with the flexibility to change on a moment's notice because no one knows what the future course of the disease will be. But I know that our sense of community has and will serve us well as we go forward. So thanks for joining us today. And we have a really terrific panel. It would definitely the A team, A+ team, I would say. And I'm going to turn it over, first of all, to our Provost Carl Lejuez, to kick it off. Carl.
Thank you, President Katsouleas. Hi, everyone. It's good to be here with all of you. As with one of our previous town halls, today we will start with a brief presentation that'll cover generally all the key aspects of our spring plan and how we hope to move from the fall into a successful spring. Okay, so okay, great. So before we begin, it's really crucial that we just take a moment to thank everyone in our community for everything that you've done through the start of this semester and over the summer. And we are at an extremely low rate of transmission. We've managed to keep our campus safe, and we have our courses being taught, our services being provided. We've had limited disruption, and we've worked as hard as we can to create a high quality UConn experience. Everyone has played a significant role in these efforts, and this has included continued adaptability and real concern for our students and colleagues that it's really important that we acknowledge. I also think what's been important is that while we've had many successes, there are certainly things that we've learned and things that we've grown through, and I appreciate the willingness of folks in our community to provide feedback and for all of us as we've listened to that feedback and worked to do everything we can to improve in the areas where that's really indicated. And so in thinking about the decision-making process itself, I will say I was on a call with several other provosts, and I was really struck by, in comparison, how much and how many different parts and constituencies of our community were a part of the planning. University Senate, undergraduate student government, graduate student senate, unions, stakeholders. We were able to, as part of our academic planning group, really start thinking about what are the issues that we need to be really interrogating and planning for the spring at a really early stage. So it allowed us to be able to work through those issues in a way where we had the opportunity to include as many people as possible and have those in some cases difficult but really instructive conversations. We've also received lots of good feedback from students, instructors, staff, and parents. And, really we've been trying to think about what are the ways in which we can create a spring that will balance safety and the best educational experience we can. And so we've announced this more broadly, but just to go over the spring semester at a glance. One of the nice things about the schedule is that everything in terms of the start and the end period will be largely the same in not largely, exactly the same in terms of what we've traditionally or what was planned for this spring. Where some of the differences are, as you know, the state requires us to have a 2-week residential quarantine for students. And in the fall, what we had done was brought students back 2 weeks early, did the quarantine then, and then began classes. And that part of our feedback from students was that that was really challenging. And so what we've been able to do is, okay. Okay, so I realized my slides were not advancing, so apologies. So what we were able to do in terms of, okay. I'm sorry, my slides are not advancing, so let me just take 1 second real quick. Okay. Tom, can you give me a thumbs up if the calendar is being shown? Okay, great. So in terms of the calendar, sorry about all that. So in terms of the calendar, the first 2 weeks, we will actually have classes happen while students are in quarantine. And so again, this was based on feedback that we had gotten. But what this means is that the first 2 weeks will be fully online. And this comes with, this was a challenging decision. We great work from the Faculty Senate or the University Senate Scholastic Standards Committee. And this was something that the Senate voted on, and it made sense in terms of not extending the time that students are here and also giving them, something to do and something challenging in those first 2 weeks of that quarantine. So then in terms of the rest of the semester would continue for those in person, for those online, it would continue online from February 1st to April 9th. What we've done is we've pushed back the spring break until the end of the 12th week. This was a really clear message from our students that it was really important that we continue to have a spring break. But of course, we worry about having students go off on spring break and then come back, and then the safety of the campus. So at the time of spring break, students would move off campus who were residential, and all of our instruction would be remote for those last 2 weeks and then exams. And also importantly, the last 2 days of the spring semester will now be reading days. So this gives students an opportunity to have a break, but then also have an opportunity to be able to prepare for their exams. So as I said, this was a calendar that was approved by the Senate, and there are no perfect options here, but it felt like one where we'd be able to support safety, but also still have as much in-person instruction as possible. So then in terms of our community health considerations, the plan was built around public health measures and recommendations and gating conditions with the state. This involved regular testing, which I'll talk about in a second, and contact tracing, social distancing, reduced occupancy in campus facilities, requirements of mask wearing and hand washing, and adherence to the UConn promise, and enhanced cleaning and disinfecting. Now, we don't know what will happen in the spring, but short of any new data, we want to use the fall as a template for the spring. Now, one of the things we've done in the fall is we've been nimble. And so there are times when things have changed and we've adjusted and we've announced how we've made those changes. So at the moment, what we're really thinking about is the best data we have, the best, kind of indicator we have is how things are in the fall. And that's how we'll consider moving forward in the spring. And as we can announce things, we will. And so in the case of the academic calendar, it felt like this was something we had to do and wanted to do sooner than later. For other things, we will wait a bit longer to make those decisions, but we will always be nimble as things change. So just to say quickly, we're utilizing the same testing strategy that we had in the fall semester. This includes reentry testing for everyone across all campuses, significant population level monitoring, efficient pooled sampling. As you may have seen in a really great recent colloquium that the university provided, some of our real academic scholars talked about the current scholarship in wastewater testing and pooled sample testing. And that was a real opportunity to share how we've been using data and real kind of expertise in these areas of behavioral health to try to keep our campus as safe as possible. And of course, this also includes individual surveillance testing for faculty, staff, and students. And so just to give you a quick glimpse of where we are currently, if you were to look at, on the bottom axis, you have date, and then across the left side, you have the percent testing positive. And as you can see, if you look at the national positivity rates in orange, and then you look at where we are here at UConn, and actually even compared to the state of Connecticut, which has done a great job in terms of its response to COVID, our positivity rates are incredibly low. And this is, there's always lots of ways to look at these data, and we've gotten some recent requests to add some additional information to our dashboard. One of the things we'll be making available soon are ways in which individuals can track on a daily basis what the positive tests are from day to day. But in any way that you look at it, our positivity rates are extremely low, and we have a really safe campus. So next we have our instructional modalities, and what we've really tried to focus on here is focusing on our best ability to support student expectations and the way instructors are best capable and suited and really skilled to be able to support a strong learning environment in their classroom. As we move closer to registration beginning on October 26th, we've asked that any modality changes be finalized by October 19th. So that's coming up this Monday. We've announced this previously. This still gives faculty an opportunity and other instructors to make any adjustments for still a bit of period of time, but also allow students to really have a sense of what the modalities are once they move into registration. And one of the things that we've talked a lot about, we've had multiple meetings about this, is that each modality brings opportunities. Each modality has strengths. There obviously are great strengths in terms of an in-person classroom environment, synchronous or kind of live online instruction has its strengths, and also does asynchronous, where a kind of full package of an online course is put together and students work through that at their own pace. Now, as I said, we really believe in each of these modalities, and there's very strong data for each of them. But our feedback also shows that some students are struggling with isolation and particularly with, in some cases, some of the aspects of asynchronous learning. And as I said, I really do want to be clear that a well-done asynchronous class can be a very strong class, but it may not be the right learning experience for everyone. And so some of the things that we've been talking about are ways in which we can add further engagement in our coursework through group work, check-ins. One thing that is really important and really crucial are office hours. And we've been talking about ways in which instructors can make students even more kind of aware, but also feeling comfortable about coming to office hours. And even in an asynchronous course, it's really actually office hours are a great opportunity to get into kind of the depth and the nuance of a course with an instructor. So we're really hoping, particularly through this semester and next semester, that we can find ways to encourage office hours use even more. And then obviously iterative feedback as we get suggestions and other thoughts, then we are always passing them along and always through our Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning, trying to support the way in which we're responding. In terms of what our modalities will look like in the spring, now I should be really clear, we haven't started registration yet, so it's pretty early on. But in general, our in-person instruction will be somewhere in the 20 to 25% range. Now, there's lots of different ways that you can look at this. What I will say is that students who are earlier in their journey here at UConn, so first and second years, that percentage may be a bit lower. But also, if you're thinking about only students who are taking are kind of on campus and not fully online, then that percentage actually gets a bit higher because the percentage is brought down by students who are only online. And so that overall percentage of in-person is a little misleading. So I think in general, thinking about us being somewhere in the 25% range makes sense. As you'll see, we're at about 60% synchronous online and about 15 to 20% of the asynchronous online. And interestingly, and this has been in response to some feedback that we've gotten and parents and students wanting to have more of that connection. This level of asynchronous learning will actually be a bit more than half or a bit less than half of what it was previously. So we were somewhere in the, depending on how you looked at it, in the 35 to 50% range for the fall. So we're really seeing a considerably greater percentage of live instruction and particularly with synchronous courses. As just a reminder, CETL has been really great in terms of supporting faculty and other instructors. We want you to continue to work with IT to ensure you have the technology that's needed. We also want to make sure that you're able to have the most effective place to teach from. Some faculty instructors have come in to teach from their office, even though they're online. We want to really support what's going to be the best opportunity for you to provide your class in the way that you think is most effective. And we really want to identify ways to build consistency for students and share materials as early as possible. Students have really shared that in this really tough time, the more consistency there is, the better for them. Syllabi is a really important place where you can really set that tone for students of wanting to really be available and work together in ways in which that students can most effectively be in your class. And we want to always be sure to be thinking about our resources at the university in terms of library and mental health services. Just a few other things. The Senate in their previous meeting also passed a set of guidelines on pass-fail. You can go to that link to see the details, and it was in what I've shared previously, but essentially it's loosened those guidelines in some key ways, including a longer period for students to be able to choose to be pass-fail, and also allowing first-year students to avail themselves of pass-fail in ways that we've not offered previously. One thing that's really important to note is that any pass-fail that students took in spring 2020 doesn't count towards the 12 credit maximum. So students still would have an opportunity to utilize pass-fail. The one thing I do want to make sure that's clear is that the Graduate Faculty Council has jurisdiction over pass-fail for graduate students, and at this time they've not made any decisions to make any changes in pass-fail. One other thing is just to go through the fee reduction. So as we've shared previously, the university has offered a $700 reduction for the fall semester, and we'll do the same for the spring for students who meet a certain set of conditions. What I will say is the reason to do this was to de-densify the campus and to try to open up as many opportunities for in-person courses for students who were in residential housing. And, it's always challenging when you do a reduction like this, because while it can be really powerful for those who receive it, and it actually did help considerably in de-densifying the campus. And I believe it has really contributed to the safety we see on campus. Obviously there are always challenges because it doesn't extend to everyone. One thing I will say is we have been struggling with ways to support kind of hands-on, one-on-one experiences for undergraduates with faculty in either an independent study or research. We've just been able to figure out a way where we're going to be able to offer within registration both an in-person or an online option for undergraduate students. This is just a really formative part of a UConn education. And, we were struggling with some of our systems, but now we're able to ensure that students who are truly online, truly off campus and involved in one of those one-on-one experiences with a faculty member or other instructor is able to take that experience, and they would still be eligible for the waiver. And so just to be really clear, in that case, it would have to be an undergraduate student, and they have to be not living on campus, no other in-person courses. In that case, they would be eligible. What I will say is that, all other details about eligibility that we've announced in multiple places are still in place. This includes graduate thesis and dissertation credits aren't eligible for the fee reduction. And I've shared a letter with grad students previously about all the reasons for that. In terms of residential housing, we're planning to consider a similar model of about 50% occupancy. Stores in Stanford Residential will have re-entry testing in the 2-week residential quarantine. Students living on campus who wish to return for the spring semester can remain in the same assignment and keep their belongings in that assignment over winter recess. And I will say, Student Affairs has been really responsive to students. Initially, they had made a decision that students would not be able to keep their belongings and keep their assignment over the break. And they've just been great in terms of being responsive to the fact that things are safer and to student demand. The cost of housing and dining will remain the same as in the fall. In the unlikely case we can remain safely on campus after spring break, it's hard to imagine that, but if we could, we certainly would not be adding any additional charges for students staying in that time. In some cases, we know students they don't have a good option for where they can go after the break. And so they are open to working with students just like they have in the fall to be able to support them. So if you have concerns about the break and your housing situation, it's important to reach out to them. And if we're unable to continue campus housing up to spring break, we will certainly prorate housing and dining refunds that will be provided to students. And there's a refund calendar that you can look at, and more information on the Residence Life website. So as you know, this has been a really challenging time financially for all universities. It's no different for UConn. I mean, in some ways, because we have such a strong student demand and because we have strong leadership, I think we've been able to navigate through this as well as one could hope. But the important point of this slide is, we are in our current case, if you go down to the very last row, it's about a $76 million deficit that we need to figure out how to mitigate. We've actually been able to cover about 48 million of that up to this point, and that's been through management furloughs, spending freeze, other cuts. We still have about 28 million that still needs to be mitigated, and there are a variety of ways in which this might be done. I won't get into all the details of that today, but I did think it was important that we at least share where we are. Now, this is very different than an early close scenario when, we always have to keep that in mind as a possibility. Every day that we continue to be safe, that becomes less of an option. And then just in terms of other considerations, being sure that you're aware of student affairs and the work they've done in terms of wellness and support for students. There are some unique factors across campuses we have to keep in mind. UConn Health will be communicating its plans as decisions are made. And in some ways, there really are just some differences in terms of what we're presenting today. The law school, which was fully online in the fall, will actually have a few upper level courses in person, but largely will continue to be online. And then for regional campuses, in-person classes at the regional will follow the announced calendar and modality guidance. And one thing we've put in place again for the spring as a temporary measure is that for students who are on regionals, there's typically a rule in which they have to have at least half of their classes on that campus to remain their home status at that campus. What we've done is for classes that are online, those don't count. So in terms of keeping that home status at your regional campus, as long as among your in-person courses, at least 50% are on your home campus, then you're able to remain as a student at that campus. So this is something that will be helpful for some regional campus students. And then in terms of general academic questions, we're taking all our cues from the state in terms of travel and guests on campus. And then we have strategies in place to try to, support unique academic situations. If there are students who have trouble completing requirements or for international students, so certainly reach out to an advisor or a department head to get support if you need that. And then as the last slide, research and external placements will continue running as planned. That those will run through the quarantine periods as long as they can be done safely. We've really tried to focus on ensuring, our diversity of students, faculty, and staff in all decisions. And, please keep in mind different resources and just some other resources that can be useful at this time in terms of our reopening and environmental health and safety, and all of our FAQs are available here. So I know that there will be lots of questions. We made today's town hall an extra half hour, so I had an opportunity to go through the slides in a not so rushed pace, but we still have an hour for questions. And let me stop sharing my screen. So what we'll do is start with questions that have been sent in advance. And then as questions go into the chat, we'll be able to take those and answer them. So let's start with, what is the earliest the university can imagine staff coming back to work on site? In addition, would we come back en masse or stagger days at first? And so I'll turn this over to Chris DeLillo, the head of HR. But before I do that, this comes back to this general rule of, as we are moving forward, we are using the fall as a template. And the fall, for right now, we will continue to try to de-densify campus. We certainly don't want to prohibit folks from coming in, but we certainly, de-densifying has worked, and we want to continue to do that. And so this is really important in terms of working with your manager, but at this point, there's, the decisions for the spring haven't been made, and we want to be very mindful that we have as much data as we can to do that. So Chris, I want to turn that over to you.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. First, I think I owe a sense of thanks to each and every one of our faculty and staff as they approach the semester and even before. This has been a stressful time for everyone, and we truly appreciate those that have come to work on our campuses and those that have stayed in their residence performing the important work that they do. As we look at the fall semester and as we address the spring semester, we really are examining what will be best. It's hard to predict what will happen by spring, but we are reviewing that right now, having discussions, and we expect an announcement by the end of the month.
Great. Thanks, Chris.
Sure.
Okay, so we have a few questions on residential housing, and I'll be turning these over to Ellie Doherty. So why did the housing plan change from students leaving their housing arrangement at Thanksgiving recess to now being allowed to keep them into the spring? How does this affect students who live off campus in the fall but plan to live on campus in the spring and take in-person classes?
You know, certainly COVID has necessitated, as I think both the president and the provost mentioned, that we be nimble and that we listen. And nimbleness comes from protecting the health of our community. And listening comes from listening to those who have had to sacrifice a lot for us to be healthy as a community. And one of the things we learned from the current residential population was that it would mean a lot to them to not have to move out and move back in, to be able to have the choice to maintain their current assignment and maintain their belongings and maintain that sense of home. And so we've heard that, we've honored that. And I think that's met with some considerable student satisfaction. But it doesn't mean we've excluded new people from entering our community who weren't able to live with us over the fall term. And many, many students chose to not join the residential community in the fall. And they made that decision based on their registration, based on their family situation and their personal needs. And they are certainly not unwelcome or excluded from the residential community in the spring. Our current target has us with a greater capacity than what we are currently housing, not by significant amounts, but enough that we feel comfortable welcoming more to the residential community. And we'll be able to accommodate new students in the spring who wish to be here. We just need to make sure you get that application in. And I think I've shared with students what we'll be evaluating for if we need to choose. But right now, I feel really comfortable with the application volume and that we can accommodate those who want to be here in the spring, whether they're new or returning students within the residential community.
Great. Thank you, Ellie. So one more for you.
Mm-hmm.
Why does the spring, in regard to the students that are in dorms, seem more restrictive than in the fall? This includes not being allowed to have residential students in the room, et cetera.
Yeah, I think it rests on that one decision. And, you know, I was speaking with students earlier today, and, you know, part of it, and the decision was this, that as we enter the winter and we are increasingly indoors, we want to make sure we're doing everything we can to keep the residential community safe. And when we looked at the violations that were occurring of our health and safety procedures, we had hundreds that were violations of our current guest policy. And that really worries us in a winter setting when we're going to be indoors even more. So we did add a restriction that said no guests within the residential community. And students let us know they were not happy with that decision. And that was fair and appropriate for us to hear. So I know on the 8th, Res Life wrote the community and wanted to acknowledge that we heard that complaint. We do have the need to be as safe as we can during the winter months. And so I hope we've met you a bit halfway there and said you're welcome to have guests in common spaces, just not in private sleeping quarters and in those arrangements within our residence halls. So I hope we found a bit of a compromise there. I absolutely hear the students that they need community and connection with one another. And sometimes that isn't the person living next door that you want to have guests. And so I hope we've been able to both meet that health concern that we have and allow students to have connection. We're just going to encourage and require that you focus on those common areas that are shared spaces not private sleeping areas.
Great. Thank you, Ellie.
Mm-hmm.
So a few questions on instruction, and I'll handle most of these. So all parents and students want live classes, at least virtually. How are pre-tape lectures and having students teach themselves an education? So this is in some ways one of the most challenging issues I think that we have at the moment, and something that we're spending a lot of time thinking about and talking about. So I think the answer is importantly nuanced. When we moved into COVID, in thinking about being online, it was important to look at data, and it was important to look at what type of teaching and instruction is going to be most effective for students. And I do want to be really clear, our giving faculty and other instructors choice is something that we believe was the right thing to do for safety reasons, but also because we have world-class faculty that we know will be able to create great classes that will be good, really important for student learning and outcomes. And what we know about asynchronous courses is that when designed well, and I will tell you, many of our faculty teaching these courses have put tens of and hundreds of hours into creating these courses, into making them rigorous, into making them thoughtful. And so I want to be very careful to say, well done asynchronous courses are very important at the university. They're also really valuable for individuals who have less access to well, not access, but individuals who may have disparities in terms of, in the way COVID has impacted them and their ability to always be available at certain times for classes because of other responsibilities that have come up. And that ability to be self-paced or to be able to choose time is actually something that many of our students have asked for and want. But the other side of things is that we do want to listen, and we do want to be aware of, even though a certain type of learning may work very well for some students, it may not be what's best for every student. And so what we've done are really two things this semester. As I mentioned before, in terms of the data, there will be a much larger assortment of opportunities for students to have, what was in the question, a live experience with an instructor. So at some level, we've talked to our faculty and instructors about this student feedback, and we will definitely see more of that in the spring. The other thing is that, in terms of the experience here, some of the courses are what we would call kind of modern ways of teaching, where we have students are learning some of the material on their own. And this is a curated learning experience that faculty have put together. And then it is followed by a really hands-on experience where faculty are working with students in groups, or where they're doing some additional lecture, or they're doing some very specific exercises with students. These require students to put some time in and to go through the material themselves. But I wouldn't, personally for me, and I know some would disagree, I wouldn't call that students teaching themselves. And so part of what we've learned in COVID is really collaboration and communication, and also trying to ensure that we are being responsive. So while I'm not comfortable saying that asynchronous courses do not have their value, because I really do believe they do, we do understand that we want to be responsive, and we believe that students will have far more ability to find courses that will fit with how they would like to learn in this semester. The next question is, where can students go if their instructors are not responding to questions or making office time available? So this is a little different than the previous question, because this is a question of quality and accessibility, and that isn't negotiable. And so faculty and instructors must be available for their office time, must be responsive to questions. And so this is something where students should share that with their advisor. If they're comfortable with a department head, share it with the provost's office. You know, there are lots of challenges in COVID, and so we want to be understanding that this has been hard on everyone, but there is a level of student engagement that we have to be offering. And I will say, my understanding is that in most cases, faculty and instructors have been very responsive, and in those cases where that isn't happening, like in all cases, we do want to hear student voice, and we do want to try to address it. So the next one, well, the first 2 weeks of graduate classes need to be taught online only, as for the undergraduate classes. You know, this is a case where, you know, I always want to be flexible. I always want to think about, okay, how can we do something in one case that maybe doesn't need the same restrictions? And I will tell you, I've created so many problems in trying to do that because the complexities are just really deep here. And as much as I want us to be flexible, I think when it comes into safety and are trying to continue to keep the campus safe, we are going to try to have as much consistency as possible with the calendar. And so graduate courses, regional campus courses, they all need to follow the same online parts, both for the first 2 weeks in the quarantine, even though obviously in many cases they're not living in residential, but they need to, their classes will be online just as it will be after the spring break. For the next question, many students are communicating their concerns about privacy and security of lockdown browser and issues with connectivity that disrupt assessments. How is UConn addressing these concerns? And for this, I wanted to ask Peter Diplock from CEDL to respond.
Thank you, Carl. So the university uses a system called Lockdown Browser with Respondus Monitor. And just so people are clear, the Lockdown Browser portion works to ensure that students can't access the internet while they're taking an exam. We've got to balance our interest in academic integrity with students' concerns over privacy. The Respondus Monitor portion helps us meet our federal obligation to make sure that the student actually taking the exam is the same student registered in the class. And Respondus Monitor uses artificial intelligence to monitor motion. So it's not a facial recognition, it's movement recognition. To date, it's been highly reliable. I think 99.8% of all exams have been fine. When there are problems with exams, we do encourage students to seek appropriate redress with their specific faculty.
Great, thank you, Peter. And so actually, Peter, I was going to ask you to take this one as well. Both students and faculty's health need to be a priority in the winter, and live classes are not realistic for the winter session.
So at this point, we are not planning on having any live in-person classes this winter session. All classes will be remote.
Okay, great, thank you. So there's a question about the fee reduction, and I'll take that one. Why are fee waivers not being considered for remote graduate researchers when they are often one of the most financially vulnerable populations on campus? So this is one of the harder aspects of doing the fee reduction. And I mentioned this a little bit in the presentation, that when you do this, you are really helping some students to be able to support them staying online if that's what's best for them, and de-densifying the campus. But it's hard for it not to feel to others that it feels unfair that their particular situation isn't being responded to. As I've shared with grad students and in a letter that I wrote to grad students over the summer, graduate student thesis and dissertation work really is different than some of the other online courses that we're looking at. It doesn't de-densify the campus because we've been able to support research, and it's really just unfortunately one of those things where this is a pretty intensive experience, and it really is not what we're talking about when we're talking about a student being willing to be fully online and utilize fewer of the resources at the university. So I know that answer is not satisfying, and I know for some it wasn't satisfying when I gave it over the summer, but that's where we are on it. So now we'll go to university finances. And so this one will go to Scott Jordan, who's our CFO. When is the UConn administration going to use some of the reserves to redress funding issues? It is, after all, for emergencies, and this is not, if this is not an emergency, what is?
Thanks, Carl. Good afternoon. The truth is that UConn does not have very much in central reserve funding. Under our budget model, our fund balances held mostly at the departments, and those fund balances come from several sources, in particular, housing and dining, research indirects, and are related to capital spending. The truth is that we use our housing and dining fund balances to support that enterprise. If we close early and we have to issue refunds to students, we'll use that balance, as we did in the spring, to pay those refunds. We also need those dollars to maintain our housing and dining buildings. The fund balances that are held in research indirect accounts are there for the purpose of supporting research. And to the extent that departments choose to use those balances to help support them during this difficult time, we will largely leave that up to those departments. There are some balances held by departments in central, or I should say, general fund accounts. We do have a budget exercise that is out to all departments and is actually due back today. And I'm looking towards Lloyd Blanchard for body language that they're coming in. And that we do expect that as we all work together to try to solve our budget difficulties, that departments will be using some of their fund balances. They may also be cutting programs or reducing the number of staff that they have, but that it will be a balanced approach from all of those sources.
Okay, and then Scott, one more for you. Is there an update on layoffs and furloughs?
I'm sure I can say, first of all, with regard to furloughs, that university management and administration has already taken furloughs, and that we, as I said, the departments, the schools and administrative departments are all working on their own staffing plans and strategies. And as I said, they are due into the budget office today. Through our labor relations department, we have engaged with our unions to keep them informed of where we are in our budget process and what our options are. And so we're not at a place yet where we're ready to announce anything, but we're gathering plans, and we should be able to know shortly where we stand.
Great, thank you, Scott.
You're welcome.
Okay, so now we have a few on testing and community surveillance strategy, and we'll go to a few different folks on these. So the first one, could the UConn dashboard also provide information on how many tests have been administered in addition to the positivity rate? This would be similar to the state of Connecticut's existing practice for their statewide dashboard. So, I will say, the administration has been tried to be as thoughtful as possible about ensuring the dashboard has extensive information, but is also readable and usable. And I will say, with the positivity rate really low where it is, I think that provides a pretty significant level of information. However, I was a faculty member for far longer than I was an administrator. And as faculty and staff and others, we don't always just want to be told what something is. We'd like to be able to get to that same decision ourselves. And so we've been talking, and as of next week, we will find some ways to add additional information kind of on a daily basis of positive cases and potentially testing of the full amount of tests. We have the data. We just want to make sure that it's not done in a way where it actually makes the dashboard unreadable, but we hear the point, and we'll be able by next week likely be able to add some additional information that would allow folks to come to the conclusions for themselves. So the next one, how often will off-campus students be retested for COVID-19 during the spring semester? How did this compare to the existing staff and in-residence student retesting program? So Ellie, will you start on that one? And then for staff, I can hand that to Chris.
Mm-hmm. So we started the fall semester and have since increased by at least threefold our surveillance testing. And that's been really important to our success in staying open. So we will be continuing our current work in testing, and that expresses itself in a couple of different ways for reopening. First, for reopening, we're going to retest the residential population, and we will need students returning to in-person learning to indicate a negative test result, and we can make tests available to those students if they wish, as we did for the fall. Then surveillance testing has become incredibly important to not only our residential population, but to our off-campus students. And currently we do surveillance testing at the STORES campus 5 days a week, 300 to 500 tests a day, roughly. And that is, and to be invited for surveillance testing, you're randomly selected, or you're in a community where we're noticing something in the wastewater. And I'll speak about that in a second. We want to get you in for a more accurate PCR test, or you're a student at the STORES campus and you just want to get tested. So surveillance testing is available to any of the STORES students, and somewhat equivalent for the Stanford students in that they're randomly selected through a residential selection as well. That's been really important. We're going to continue doing that in the spring semester, and we're hoping to bolster an already strong program that we have on the STORES campus in wastewater testing, where we have pumps located throughout the campus. We're able to sample the wastewater and detect prior to a PCR test if there's a level of COVID-19 in the wastewater that we need to be more attentive to. And that then leads to the next step, which is pooled sampling, where a community is invited to gargle and spit into a tube. We then pool those samples and see if we have positives that we need to be attended to. And then, of course, that leads you to student health and wellness for the PCR tests that we're offering, either through point of care for students who are feeling ill and want to come directly in by reaching out to the advice nurse, or through an asymptomatic surveillance test through the field house. We're going to continue that sort of multi-tiered testing strategy because it really allows us to monitor the health of the population. Because something that's really important that emerged is that most of our students, when they test positive, aren't feeling sick. They're asymptomatic, and we're identifying them through these surveillance efforts. And that's important because we're identifying illness before the illness even presents to you as an individual. We're isolating those students and making sure they're not interacting with others until they're well again, and then they return to the community. So we'll do the same thing in the spring. It's worked for us so far. We want to continue doing that.
And great. And for Chris, for you, there's another employee testing question. So let me ask that also, and then you can fold those in together.
Certainly.
On many occasions, a faculty member will need to be tested for RT-PCR nose test with a quick return of results in order to avoid a long time away in quarantine while waiting for the result. CVS results are slow, 2 to 3 days. Would UConn arrange for fast testing with fast results when needed? So I'll let you take all of those in any way you'd like.
Certainly. I'd like to talk about where we've been and where we anticipate going as we consider ongoing faculty and staff testing. So at baseline testing at the start of the semester, we performed about 2,700 tests. We invited about 3,600 faculty and staff to partake in the testing strategy, and we believe we had a strong response. The as the semester began, we said that we would evaluate the ongoing testing strategy, and we opened up a two-prong or twofold approach to faculty and staff testing. One was what we call potential exposure, where there was a concern or worry of an individual who was in the workplace who might have become infected or was worried that they were going to become symptomatic. At that point, we acknowledged the conversation should continue with their manager, and the manager could quickly order a test, either at the store's testing tent or for our colleagues at regional campuses through CVS or another vendor by the name of Vault. In addition to that, HR has continued a random surveillance program. We invite approximately 400 faculty and staff every week to be tested across all of our campuses. As we hit colder weather, we are researching and expanding out a plan of moving the Brown testing tent to the center campus and moving from our nasopharyngeal testing that's provided through our UConn health partners to a different, less invasive test. And we hope through that approach, there'll be greater accessibility for people invited. And we are also looking in a large group of people for whom I have to show a debt of gratitude. Police and public safety, Fac Ops, and our UConn health partners are assisting us in determining the next approach for the faculty and staff as we approach the spring semester. So we're navigating that. With regards to speed, so with our UConn health tests, we're averaging between 24 and 48 hours. With CVS and Vault, clearly there is a delay. Vault is a mail-in approach. CVS tends to be 2 to 3 days. As we move to on stores to the on-campus approach, we're hopeful we'll get a better result. With CVS and Vault, if we do have faculty members who are in our regional campuses, I'd ask them to reach out to HR at uconn.edu to see if there's other availability. We'll try our best. Testing results do take time.
Great, thanks, Chris. And I'll just, because I know the answer to this one, there was just a question about whether testing for regional campus students will be in place in the same way for the spring semester as it was for the fall, and the answer to that is yes. And good, because Ellie just confirmed that for me. Perfect. Okay, so then a new question on tenure clock is, has there been any thoughts for a second tenure clock extension? So let me kind of take a step back here and say we've been very aware that while what we were able to do in terms of the first tenure clock extension last year it was quick, and this was done before I was here, so I can be very complimentary of it. It was done very quickly and thoughtfully. There's a lot of issues that we need to be thinking about now. So there is a question of, should we have a second extension? There's also, what about new faculty? I mean, the extension is not toward them. We also started to ask questions about APIRs and multi-term faculty, if there's some things we need to be considering there. I mean, with this, we want to try to limit it to those cases where there is a hard, unmovable deadline. That's one of the reasons that having the extension is so important. But these are all areas that we are considering. Michael Bradford, who's our new Vice Provost for Faculty, Staff, and Student Development. This is one of the first things that when he started, I brought to him and said, we need to start thinking about this now. We want to wait a little bit because we really have no idea at this moment what the extent of the impact will be through the spring. But I have started talking to the Board of Trustees about this. We've started having regular meetings in our Vice Provost meeting. We've been talking with Frank Tewitt, who's our new CDO and Vice President for Diversity and Inclusion. I'm also really, as many are too, really worried about potential disparities for women faculty and staff. And what is, it's not to say that men faculty who have families are not taking on some additional responsibilities, but the data are very clear. Women are more affected. And this is another thing we've asked Michael to start leading discussions on. At some point, it can't just be that we're aware of it, that we have to have identified, tangible initiatives and solutions. But these are all questions that we are talking about now, and I expect as we get into the end of the fall and early part of the spring that we will start being able to make some decisions. Okay, another surveillance testing question. How does surveillance testing work for off-campus students? Are they requested regularly? This question, is there, in terms of answering this question, can you focus not just on the in-residence population, but off-campus students and those not living in residence halls? Ellie, can you take that one?
So a couple of things we think about for surveilling off-campus students who are living in the stores area. Our wastewater sampling does include downtown stores, which is an important residential hub for the university that is not part of on-campus housing. So if you think about the Oaks, that's about 1,000 beds there, and many of them we believe are our undergraduate students. And I'm thankful to our partnership with the Oaks when we've been working with issues off campus. So our wastewater does allow us to monitor some of the stores community where we know we have some density of UConn students living off campus. We will identify off-campus students for surveillance if we're worried about positive cases associated with a particular region. We've even been known to stop by an off-campus address that we might be concerned about. And then surveillance is also just an open invitation to all of the students in the stores area. Like, we understand that you may be concerned. You may feel like you were exposed. You may, I've heard students share that I just feel better getting tested once every 2 weeks. And we can allow that to happen through the surveillance testing. Your desire to be tested benefits our understanding of the health of the community. So we approach the off-campus population in a myriad of ways, which include wastewater testing that hits the downtown stores area, an open invitation to surveillance, but us issuing invitations and occasionally visiting an off-campus home if we feel as though there's a need for us to get more students in for testing to determine if some positive results we're seeing are isolated or maybe indicative of in that community. And then when it comes to regional student care, our work there is very closely tied to the Department of Public Health and their obligation to monitor health in the community there. And between public health and the student's own medical provider, we can supplement that through access to testing if need be. We're able to supplement that through the reentry testing, but that's more of a partnership between the regional public health that works closely with those areas where the regionals are, the student's medical provider, which for our regional campuses is not Shaw, and any additional needs we need to provide for, such as reentry testing.
Great, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't believe this, but I don't see any additional questions. So if there are other questions that folks want to ask, please do that. But in the interim, I thought I might ask Radenka Merich to just talk a little bit about how things are going with research. I know that the OVPR's office has been very active from early on and had one of the earliest town halls and had a lot of work in getting our research labs up and going. So anything you might want to add, Radenka?
Thank you, Carl, and thank you everybody for your participation. We are really proud of our students and faculty that are in the labs that had been practicing the safety and still getting things done and amazing results. This year we achieved the highest research awards in the history of university, and this in spite of the COVID, and this is something to celebrate. We are also letting our undergraduate students to join the labs. It depends on the individual faculties, the space of the labs that they have, and how many students they can monitor and mentor. So before you go to labs, you will need to do the safety test, you will need to follow the safety protocol, and your faculty is going to put the management policy and work shifts, but we want to give opportunity to our undergraduate students to be in the labs.
Great, thanks, Radenka. And actually, Dan Wiener, I thought if you wanted to add anything about international students or faculty or just anything more general in your role as a director of global affairs.
Sure.
Sorry, Vice Provost for Global Affairs.
Thank you, Carl. Yeah, we have about over 90% of our graduate students, international graduate students, are actually in Connecticut. Most of them have stayed here, and about 70% of our undergraduates are actually overseas. So there's a big difference in those two different populations, and we continue to work with them the best that we can. I think my message is we continue to build global programs, some of them virtual, and we're excited about the time when we can get on planes and visit places and do things, because that time will come. But between now and then, we continue to do what we need to do to service our student population and to continue to build innovative programs. We're very proud of our China program. We had a lot of students who couldn't get here from China. We have over 400 studying in China. We have 350 freshmen studying in China. So I like to remind them that they're a very special group because they're the first freshman group in the history of the University of Connecticut to start their UConn academic career in China. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Dan. And then Kent, Dean of the Graduate School, and anything specific on grad students?
I'll just share a few words. Of course, many of our graduate students have a dual role as research or teaching assistants as well as students. And so graduate students, as students, face all of the challenges that undergraduates do in many of the same ways. We are very grateful to all of our colleagues for the work they're doing to help support our graduate students, and we're, of course, available to help them as well. And we're especially grateful to that subset of our graduate students who serve as graduate assistants and provide vital teaching and research support to the university, because we would not be able to offer the instruction we do to students without their support, and we would not be able to do the research that we do without their support.
Great, and I'll just add too with that, we've really been very assertive about making sure that graduate students have the same protections that faculty and other instructors have in terms of their ability to teach in a way that they believe is safe. And as we know, it's always vulnerable for graduate students, and so we just want to try to create as many opportunities for students, grad students, to be able to share, any concerns they're having, but also we want to try to have things in place to support them. And so, Ken, I appreciate that. So, I will say, in general, this is a really challenging time, and there are areas that are challenging all the time for us, but are exacerbated and disparities are created and vulnerabilities are made worse. And I think the work that Frank Tuitt is doing as our new CDO and Vice President for Diversity and Inclusion is really kind of central in this. Frank, do you want to just say a word?
Sorry, I couldn't find unmute, but good afternoon, everyone. Been a great 2 months since I've been able to join the UConn family and get to know folks across the institution. Plenty of opportunities for teachable moments, as I like to frame them in the positive way, opportunities to understand the challenge ahead, the opportunities that are in front of us, but most importantly, the people we have an opportunity to collaborate with across the institution. I think that's been the most impressive part of this, working with folks. We have, as Carl said, a lot of work to do, and we're trying to tackle this. Somebody said the other day, one bite at a time. So more to come as we continue to cover this landscape of advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion across the system.
Great, thanks. And we have received one additional question. Kent, if you can take this one, Dan possibly as well. Can international students take all online classes next semester in the U.S.?
I think I may actually have to defer this to Dan because I'm not sure what the current status is.
So that's a moving target, and right now they really should have one course that's face-to-face, but things change so much that I recommend you check in with the ISSS regarding your specific situation. We don't like to give advice to a broad group because people's specific situations can be different.
Okay. So I think we are closing in. So I would like to just generally say that it is very clear how challenging this semester has been and how hard faculty, staff, and students have worked. And Ellie Doherty just wants to just share a few words about that and how in her very student-facing role, how everyone's efforts have really been a great partnership with her.
I just have a unique opportunity to talk to a lot of the faculty tonight, and normally my demographic averages out at around 20 years old. So I want to say to you, this is hard on everyone. It's really been hard on the students because this is the time where we make friends and we make connections, and we do all those things for the first time. It's part of the university experience, and that's really been compromised for a lot of our students. But what has emerged from that are faculty who care so much. And I want to thank you, because more than any other semester, I have seen faculty write me personally or submit referrals to my staff that say, I teach online and Ellie's had her screen off for the last 3 weeks and I'm just a little worried about her. Or I haven't seen this student in a few weeks and they're not responding to my emails when I reach out to check in on them. And I want to say to you there, often we're told UConn is big and impersonal, but those actions directly contradict it, and it helps me help them. And I really, really thank you for that, because we are now a community that is global, that has students online all over the world, that does not rely on a heavily residential population right now, but our obligation to care for them and commit to their success remains. So I truly thank you. I've never seen so many faculty referrals and individuals reaching out, asking us to just make sure students are doing okay. And I will say, I'm sure I'm not the only one multitasking. I had 3 different faculty emails in the last 2 hours with just that question of, can we check on this student and make sure they're okay? Those efforts, that conscientiousness, that kindness, and that care is helping us get through COVID right now. And I truly thank all of you for those gestures and those efforts. You're helping us help the students, and we will get through this. And it's because of those actions. So thank you so much.
So it's great that you've done that, because now I will take the staff part and in terms of many of our vice presidents and the work that Chris DeLello is doing, but I think about what the folks in dining have done, in facilities, the registrar. I feel like I need to send them donuts every day for the next 3 years, because I've just created so many complications for them and they always get it. Advising, the cultural centers. I can't name everything, but you think about what our finance group has done, and just so many staff have, as we like to say here, keep the university running. And I know Tom wrote a really great article in the Daily Campus about this, thanking folks, and we just really couldn't do this. And let me end by saying, like, there's nothing more annoying than a full provost, and so that's not the intention of this. The intention is to say there are a lot of people working really hard, and we would not be where we were if it wasn't for that. At the same time, there are lots of feedback that we're getting, and I really appreciate the responsiveness that folks have had, the way in which, even though they're tired, even though, they are really trying, there's always an openness. And I feel like we are in a really good position coming out of the fall to finish it off safe and to be even stronger in the spring. And I'm very lucky to be here. I really appreciate this opportunity to kind of take the lead in this today. And it's nice to have a great team. And I'm still trying to get over the fact there aren't more questions, but I guess I'll just leave it at that. So I'll pass it off to our president to finish this off.
Great. Thank you, Carl. Well done. I just want to say a final thank you to everyone in the audience for attending. We had over 300 people join us for this town hall. So thank you for that. I want to thank the panelists for their excellent answers, but more than that, for the expertise and leadership they've brought to the university and shared with you today. I am so proud of this university and the way it's responded to this challenge, not just in staying well and healthy and open, but in the way that you have all done it to support our values, and in particular, the values that really stand out, mentioned here today a little bit, but inclusion and caring for each other as a community. I'm really proud of all of you. I wish you a great rest of the semester. Stay well. Thank you for attending. Good afternoon, everyone.